In the cold, vast waters of the North Atlantic, between Iceland and Scotland, something extraordinary is happening. Two ships, unseen, unnoticed, are suddenly at the center of a global storm. The United States has seized these vessels linked to Venezuelan oil exports in a high-stakes operation. But this isn't just about oil. It's about power, control, and the future of global energy. Why take such risks? Why send military forces into international waters? What's so crucial about stopping Venezuelan oil, already crippled by years of sanctions? This is a battle in a silent war, fought not on battlefields, but in the markets of oil. A struggle between the United States, Russia, China, and Venezuela. Each side trying to hold on to what matters most, control over oil. And it's not just about the tankers, it's about what happens next. The future of oil politics, the power it holds, the influence it gives. So ask yourself, what does this operation really mean? What's at stake? Stay with me as we dive deeper. Let's explore the hidden forces shaping this global conflict. So, what's really happening here? Why has the United States seized two tankers linked to Venezuelan oil? It's not just about one country or one operation. It's about a much bigger global struggle. Venezuela, once a major oil exporter, is now trapped in a web of sanctions and economic collapse. For years, the US has been trying to choke off Venezuela's oil exports. Why? Because the US sees Venezuela's government as a threat, a regime it wants to remove. But what about the oil itself? Why is Venezuela's oil so important? It's because Venezuela holds the world's largest proven oil reserves. Oil is power, and control over it means control over vast wealth. In an increasingly unstable world, access to oil is a lifeline. And here's the thing. Stopping Venezuela's oil exports is a powerful way to weaken the government. It denies them the resources to stay in power, but it also affects global markets. These aren't just tankers carrying crude. They're symbols of a broader economic war, one that stretches from the Caribbean to Russia. This is where the story gets complicated. It's not just about Venezuela. It's about how nations react to these moves. What happens next? To understand why the United States is so focused on Venezuelan oil, we must look at the history. The roots of this conflict go back years long before these tankers set sail. In the 1990 seconds, Venezuela was a key player in global oil markets. But when Hugo Chavez came to power in 1999, everything changed. Chavez was a revolutionary, and he had big plans for Venezuela's oil wealth. He used oil to fund social programs, challenge US influence in Latin America, and support allies like Cuba. But his policies were also controversial, and they set the stage for the problems Venezuela faces today. In 2014, oil prices began to drop. Venezuela, which was heavily reliant on oil exports, started to feel the pain. The US and European Union imposed sanctions targeting Venezuela's oil industry, hoping to weaken Chavez's successor, Nicolas Maduro. By 2019, the US had taken even stronger actions, including freezing the assets of Venezuela's state oil company, PDVSA. But this wasn't just about politics. It was about oil, a resource so valuable that it controls the balance of power. For the US, Venezuela's oil was a tool, a way to isolate the regime. But Venezuela didn't just sit back. It turned to Russia and China for support, creating a new axis of power. Russia offered military aid, while China provided loans in exchange for oil. And so we arrive at today. Venezuela is still a key player in global oil, but it's struggling. The US has tried to block its oil exports through sanctions and by targeting tankers. But Venezuela, with the help of its allies, has found ways around these barriers. That's where the tankers come in. These vessels, like the Marinera and the MT, Sofia, are part of Venezuela's shadow fleet ships that sail under false flags and try to avoid detection. The tension finally reached a breaking point in the North Atlantic. The Marinera, a tanker flying a false flag, was pursued for nearly 2 weeks. U.S. forces tracked it as it moved through waters between Iceland and Scotland, where the operation would unfold. This wasn't just a regular naval operation. It was a high-stakes chase with international consequences. The United States had already warned that it would take action against ships linked to Venezuela's illicit oil exports. But this operation was different. This wasn't just about stopping a tanker. It was about sending a message to the world that the U.S. would do whatever it takes to enforce its sanctions and control oil markets. The Royal Navy of the UK also played a role, offering logistical support. Together, they boarded the Marinera, which had been hiding its true identity by flying the flag of Guyana. A false flag meant the vessel was stateless without protection from international law. This gave the U.S. forces the legal grounds they needed to seize the ship. But here's the twist. This ship wasn't just any ship. It was part of Venezuela's shadow fleet, a group of vessels that operate outside the rules, trying to dodge sanctions. The Marinera was carrying Venezuelan crude oil, a vital resource for a nation under heavy sanctions. The White House quickly issued a statement calling the Marinera a stateless vessel and confirming the judicial order to seize it. This wasn't just a military operation, it was a legal maneuver to stop the flow of oil. But Russia wasn't happy about this. The tanker was Russian flagged, and Moscow quickly condemned the seizure. They demanded that the U.S. treat their crew properly and allow them to return to Russia. Russia even sent a submarine to safeguard the vessel, though it didn't stop the U.S. forces. The message was clear. Russia would not tolerate this interference. Behind every move, every action, there is a hidden mechanism at play. It's not just about seizing ships or enforcing sanctions. It's about the system that governs how oil moves, how power is exerted, and how nations play the game. First, let's look at the shadow fleet. This is a network of tankers that operate outside the normal rules, dodging sanctions, falsifying flags, and hiding their true identities. These vessels aren't just smuggling oil. They're part of a broader strategy to circumvent international law and continue operations despite global pressure. The U.S. knows this. That's why they're focusing on these vessels. By targeting them, the U.S. isn't just stopping oil from reaching Venezuela, it's sending a message to other countries. We're watching, and we will act. But this system doesn't just involve the United States. Other nations, like Russia and China, play a part too. They've built their own networks of support for Venezuela, helping it evade sanctions. Russia, for instance, has been sending military aid, while China has been buying up oil and offering loans in return. This is where the real power lies. It's not in just the ships or the oil. They're simply the tools in a larger game. The true game is about controlling the flow of resources and controlling the global economy. Oil is a commodity that no one can live without. So, controlling oil gives nations the leverage they need to influence others. That's why Venezuela's oil isn't just a national issue, it's a global one. The operations against the shadow fleet are a battle for control of the world's energy supply. A supply that, more than ever, is central to global power. The tension escalates. In the Caribbean, another tanker, the MT Sophia, becomes the focal point of a second high-stakes operation. This time, the operation is even more coordinated, more deliberate. The U.S. is closely monitoring Venezuela's oil exports, knowing that the nation's economy depends on this lifeline. The MT Sophia, like the Marinera, was linked to illicit activities smuggling Venezuelan crude under the radar. Operating in international waters, it was on a path to evade sanctions and continue its journey to destinations where the oil would find a market. But the U.S. was ready. The Coast Guard, with its precise surveillance, intercepted the ship before it could make its escape. In a tightly coordinated pre-dawn operation, the U.S. forces boarded the MT Sophia, securing another victory in the war against Venezuela's shadow fleet. But this wasn't just another seizure, it was a statement. The U.S. was now operating in two fronts. Tightening its grip on Venezuela's most vital resource, the message was clear. No tanker, no matter how hidden or disguised, would be allowed to pass freely. And it didn't stop there. This operation also revealed the growing cooperation between the US and Venezuela's own government. Surprisingly, Venezuela's leadership had started to cooperate with US authorities on certain operations. They understood that to survive, they had to adapt to the changing landscape, work with the US to ensure their oil moves in a controlled manner, and they would avoid economic collapse. This second crisis shows the complexity of the situation. It's not just about seizing oil tankers, it's about shaping the future of global oil trade, about gaining leverage in a conflict that goes beyond one nation's borders. Amidst all the geopolitical maneuvers, there is one group whose voices are rarely heard, the people of Venezuela. These are the individuals who feel the real impact of the international tug-of-war over oil. For years, Venezuela's people have been caught in the crossfire. As the US tightens its grip on Venezuela's oil, the daily lives of ordinary citizens are thrown into turmoil. Imagine this. You're a mother struggling to feed your children while the price of basic goods skyrockets. You're a student trying to find hope in a country whose future seems uncertain. And every day you hear that oil, the resource that could provide so much, is being blocked from reaching the world. For the Venezuelan people, the consequences of these sanctions are clear. The government is starving for cash, unable to fund the basic services needed to support its citizens. Hospitals are underfunded, schools are closing, and jobs are disappearing. Meanwhile, the black market is thriving as people try to survive in a system that no longer works for them. The seizure of these tankers, while a victory for the US in the global struggle, adds to the suffering of those who are already in crisis. It means more pressure on a country that's already at breaking point. The loss of oil revenue means the government has even less to offer its people, and the cycle continues. But here's the thing, the people of Venezuela know what's at stake. They understand that their country's future is tied to the flow of oil, and yet they are caught in a system of power and politics that they can't control. So while the world watches these high-level confrontations unfold, let's not forget the human toll. Every sanction, every blockade, every action taken in the name of power and control, it's the people of Venezuela who pay the price. The impact of these actions stretches far beyond the borders of Venezuela. When the US seizes a tanker in the Caribbean or the North Atlantic, it's not just about Venezuela. It's about global power, global security, and the way oil flows through the world. The first and most obvious impact is on oil markets. Every move the US makes, whether it's seizing a tanker or imposing sanctions, creates uncertainty in global oil prices. This means that countries around the world are watching closely, trying to figure out how to navigate the shifting energy landscape. But the consequences are even more profound. These actions affect the way nations interact with one another. Countries like Russia and China are already deeply involved in Venezuela's oil industry. Russia has provided military and economic support to the Venezuelan regime, while China has invested billions in oil deals. Now, as the US moves aggressively to block Venezuela's oil, these nations are forced to react. China, in particular, is concerned. For years, China has been Venezuela's largest oil customer. If Venezuela's oil exports are further blocked, it could disrupt China's energy security, affecting its economy. Russia, meanwhile, views these operations as a direct challenge to its influence in the region. Moscow has denounced the US actions, calling them an unjustified attack on its national interests. For Russia, this is more than just about Venezuela. It's about challenging US dominance in global affairs. And don't forget about oil consumers around the world. Countries like India, Japan, and European nations depend on Venezuelan oil to meet their energy needs. When these exports are blocked, it creates a ripple effect, affecting not just oil prices, but global trade itself. So this conflict isn't just a bilateral issue between Venezuela and the US. It's a global one, a struggle that shapes the way nations interact, the way energy flows, and the way global markets function. So, where does this all lead? What will happen next in this complex, high-stakes battle for Venezuela's oil? Let's explore three possible futures. First, the best-case scenario. In this scenario, Venezuela's oil exports are brought back into the global market in a controlled manner. The country enters a period of recovery as its leadership, under pressure, agrees to cooperate with the international community. Sanctions are eased, and oil flows again, allowing Venezuela to stabilize its economy. The Venezuelan people begin to see relief, and global markets benefit from the increased oil supply. This scenario would mark a return to relative stability, where the oil-rich nation begins to rebuild. But now, let's consider the middle ground. Here, the Venezuelan government continues to struggle, but it refuses to fully cooperate with the US or ease its grip on power. Oil flows intermittently, but the economy remains fragile. The US continues its sanctions, and Venezuela faces internal strife. The situation stabilizes only to a degree, as outside players like Russia and China continue to exert influence. This scenario leads to a long-term standoff, with Venezuela remaining in limbo, struggling to thrive, but never quite able to break free from the cycle of sanctions and economic collapse. Finally, the worst-case scenario. In this outcome, the tension reaches a breaking point. Venezuela becomes a failed state, with its government unable to maintain control. Oil exports are nearly halted, and the economy collapses completely. The country faces widespread unrest, and regional powers are forced to intervene. This could lead to a broader conflict, with the US and its allies stepping up their efforts to reshape Venezuela's future. In this worst-case future, the ripple effects would be felt across the region, with global oil prices soaring and economies around the world reeling from the instability. So, which future will we face? Will Venezuela manage to stabilize, or will it continue to spiral into chaos? As we conclude this journey, we've seen the true stakes of this conflict. What happens in Venezuela is not just a local issue, it's a matter of global significance. The US seizing tankers, the sanctions, the international alliances, it's all part of a much larger game of power, and the outcome will affect us all. Here's the insight. Oil is more than just a commodity. It's the lifeblood of the global economy. Who controls oil controls the future. And right now, Venezuela's oil has become the center of a geopolitical struggle that could change the course of history. So, what does this all mean for the world? If the US succeeds in its efforts to cut off Venezuela's oil, we could see a shift in the balance of power. Other nations, Russia, China, and even regional players will respond, shaping the future of global energy markets. This isn't just about oil. It's about global influence, economic stability, and the future of international relations. But here's the most important question. What will happen to Venezuela's people? They are the ones who will suffer the most from this struggle. While the world's superpowers clash over oil, the Venezuelan people are left to face the consequences.